Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 4. This week, we are going to be exploring consciousness. This is your instructor, Joni Gaynor, and I just wanted to touch on a few topics. We are going to take an introductory exploration of the fascinating world of human consciousness. We're going to look at its nature, its origins, and its implications. So, what is consciousness? Uh, Consciousness is actually very complex and multifaceted concept. Basically, it talks about our own awareness of the world around us, as well as our own intermental processes and our sense of self, what we know about ourselves and how we feel and think. Understanding the nature of consciousness remains a profound challenge for science and philosophy, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So, being aware of your surroundings. This has to do with being cognizant of the external environment, what smells you may experience, the sights around you, movement, sounds, and physical sensations. If something is hot or warm or cold, for example, maybe even something that's wet, like the rain, the sound, the thunder, and the actual wetness. That has to do with the awareness of your surroundings. Then we've got the introspection. This has to do with the ability to observe and examine your own thoughts, feelings, and mental processes. So, for example, for some people, the rain may trigger feelings of emotion that are sad, but for others, it brings pure joy and relaxation to them. Then we've got the sense of self. This has to do with your own identity, your own personality, and those experiences that are distinct from others. Think a lot about what made you you. So I'm going to give a random example, but maybe you went through a tragedy when you were younger. Maybe it was a divorce of your parents, or maybe it was a parent that walked out on you. That maybe contributed to your own personality, maybe brought some trust issues for you that you've had to work through, things like that. That is an example of sense of self. And then we've got the conscious experience. This is the subjective first person experience of the world, one's own internal mental states. These are where we come up with those I statements. And that is the subjective first person experience, how you feel. I feel, and then fill in that blank. So let's take a look real quickly about the history of consciousness. So, ancient Greece times, we had philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. They grappled with this concept of the soul and its relationship to the consciousness. What was that deep down soul, and how did it relate to consciousness? Then we moved into the 17th century, and that's where we had Rene Descartes, who had that mind body dualism. And he proposed essentially that consciousness is a distinct non physical property of the mind. Did not believe that there was a physical aspect to it at all. Again, this was very early research, right? 17th century. Then in the 19th century, we've emerged and we had this more scientific discipline. This led to us actually studying the consciousness and the various states. We learned, for example, that we have sleep, we have wakefulness, and then we've also got these altered states. And so that came with research, and that is the 19th century. All right, 20th century, we really dive into Freud and his work on the unconscious mind. Remember, Freud talks about the id, the ego, and the superego. And so we talked about that earlier. But the id, ego, and superego, with Freud, we really dive into this notion of consciousness as the totality of our mental experiences. All right, and then we've got the 1990s here too. That was known as the decade of the brain, where we saw a surge in this neuroscientific research. It helped us to better understand the neural correlates of consciousness. I wanted to share this quote with you by Albert Einstein because I think it's just a great quote and one that really relates to what we are talking about. And it says, "The most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible." So again, the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. And that was by Albert Einstein. I think it's a rather profound statement, and we'll talk a little bit more as we get into this on our next slide. All right, so neuroscience and consciousness. Where are we at? Consciousness is the subjective experience of the world around us, as we talked about. It is a very complex phenomenon that has captivated the scientific community for decades. We are still learning about the mind and the consciousness of the mind. At the core of it lies these intricate workings of the brain. And again, remember in week 2, we talked a lot about the brain and the various functions of the brain, but we are still learning about the brain, and thus we are still learning about consciousness. It is a remarkable organ, the brain is, that not only receives and processes different sensory information, but it also gives rise to our inner mental states, our own emotions, and our self-awareness. So think about it in terms of our own mental states. If we're sad, if we're happy, our emotions, anger plays a role in this, as well as our own self-awareness, what we know about ourselves, what brings us pleasure, what brings us sadness or anger. All of this comes into mind. Okay, I mentioned that we were going to talk about altered states of consciousness, and here we are. So one example is meditation. And so meditation is an altered state of consciousness where we practice meditation, which is an induced state of deep relaxation. It's enhanced focus, and it also increases our self-awareness. So if you have never done meditation, I recommend that you give it a try. It does produce a sense of breath work. It also helps us to focus, and then it brings an increased self-awareness, where that self-awareness you will be more in touch with yourself, your own thoughts, and how those thoughts make you feel. We've also got dreaming. So keep in mind that dreaming is the altered state of consciousness where we experience REM sleep. It's where the brain generates these vivid, sometimes bizarre dreams and images, and these provide insights into our subconscious mind. If you've never done like a dream analysis type class, I encourage you to look into it. It is pretty fun. There's a mixed reviews about it, but interpreting dreams can be pretty fascinating. And then we've got the psychedelic experiences. These are brought about by psychedelic substances such as LSD, and they can result in some profound changes in perception, emotions, and sense of self. Do not recommend that you try that one, but it is a state of altered consciousness. And so I wanted to make sure we brought it to your attention. All right, and then we've got the artificial consciousness. So that has to do with understanding consciousness. We've talked a little bit about this and how it might be replicated in the artificial world. So AI is huge right now, and this is something that is now being explored. We've got different techniques or methods to exploring this, such as neural networks. We've got cognitive architecture, and we've also got computational models done with computers. And there's challenges and limitations to artificial consciousness. Some of that includes self-awareness, subjective experience, as well as the philosophical debate about the nature of consciousness. Next, I want to talk just briefly about consciousness on a continuum. So this has to do with how these different forms of artificial intelligence might fit along the spectrum, from basic information processing to actually self-reflective systems. So if you've ever used any form of AI, you will know that that's what the basic part is, right? That's just information processing. This gets more advanced as we start talking about self-reflective systems that are now being built and discovered. And then we've got the implications and future direction. Where is this artificial consciousness going? Right now, there is future research looking at a whole bunch of different areas. I think it's a great place for you to explore. There are a lot of societal and ethical implications, so make sure that you investigate that, but it is something that's worth exploring. Got the subjective nature of consciousness and the self. This has to do with they're each They're unique to each individual. They cannot be directly observed or measured by others, nor can they necessarily be observed by others, right? But they can through introspection and self reflection. This has to do with the meditation aspect. And then lastly, we've got the philosophical and scientific perspectives. This has to do with where our scholars have explored these theories and models to help us understand the underlying mechanisms and the implications for our understanding of human experience. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at jgaynor@fortiscollege.edu and let me know if you have any questions. You can also message me directly in Canvas. Thank you.